For now, let's move on to the topic at hand. And we got this from a person who's usually in the chat room. This was left on. This is a comment on YouTube, and the person's name is CJ. And I hope at some point CJ gets to see this. I believe CJ is a man. I don't know. Maybe that's an assumption. Maybe I shouldn't assume. He says, "Can you please help me to understand how I can teach or explain your statement at timeline 135 through 140. I'm going to play this. This is on the video that he's commenting on. He says, in relation to Colossians 2:11 through 17, Romans 14, and Acts 11:9, all three of these passages predominantly have to do with food, but both Colossians and Romans also throw in days of the week, right? And we'll read these here in a few minutes. I don't actually think I have all of them here. I don't know if I grabbed the Romans passage, but I will.
It was Colossians 2 what?
It's 11 through 17.
Okay.
Romans 14, and he's talking predominantly.
Sure. And Acts 11:9. Got it.
Right. And cool. I think he's talking, yeah. And, okay. Hang on just a sec. I'm actually opening my Accordance Bible software here. This is the behind the scenes that our supporters get, having to wait around for me to open programs. While I open that, let's listen to, so what I did was I went back into one of our old videos that's up on our YouTube, the one that CJ commented on, and I actually just pulled an audio clip from it. Here I am. I'm at Romans 14 now. Okay. Now that I got that, let me bring this back up here and bring this back up here. Let's listen to our conversation. Now, what I did was I actually pulled 53 seconds of this. He's looking for 5 seconds, but I figured that we had to give context and kind of let people understand what we are even talking about. Sure. So that's why I did this. And we believe that sanctification is done through the Torah. In other words, Jews and Gentiles alike are sanctified through Torah. Everyone's on a different walk, and so our Christian brothers and sisters who reject, well, they say they reject the Torah, or that the Torah has been done away with. We know that this isn't true, though, because they still believe in things like love your neighbor as yourself and love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. But they reject certain parts of the Torah, like eating pork or the Sabbath or the festivals. That's your 5 seconds. Everyone's on a different walk, and many of us have been.
And I liken that to like Peter, who in Galatians too, how Paul describes Peter. Peter is saved, but he hasn't worked out some theological deals.
Okay, so the main portion that he's focusing on is not that everyone's on a different walk. I think that CJ actually would. I think he would agree with that statement that everybody's on a different walk. Okay, and I think that we can prove that from obviously our own lives. And also your example of Peter and whatnot. I think what he's actually referencing here, because of the different verses that he brings up, is the idea that I said that Christians predominantly don't keep a kosher diet, they don't keep the Sabbath, they don't keep the festivals. So these are the three main, and I've said this many times on our show, that these are the three main issues that diverge the Torah pursuant believers, as opposed to what many people would say non-Torah keeping Christians. But really it's not non-Torah keeping, right? It's only these three issues mainly. I mean, we have other things like sighting the new moon or wearing tzitzit or things like this. But for the most part, it's kosher, Sabbath, festivals. These are the things that are dividing. And so CJ goes on and says, as a teacher, I want to explain this precisely and according to one interpretation, though many applications of God's word. I understand, and that's good. Historical grammatical interpretation is kind of, I think, what he's leaning on there. I understand what you are saying, but when I read the verses I mentioned, I get tripped up. Okay, let's read some of these verses. Let's start with the easiest one.
First of all, thanks for the email. I think it's a great email.
It is a great email.
Appreciate that. Another point is, Caleb, I have to confess, I kind of closed my eyes. I was listening to the recording, and all of a sudden I forgot we were listening to a clip. And I was like, yeah. Like, I was listening to you talk, and I'm like, yeah.
That's funny.
It was funny. But so, yeah, we had a quote there that we listened to. So what do you think? Should we? I think it'd be nice to start I'm thinking Acts,
Right.
then Colossians, then Romans,
Sure.
maybe, or
Yeah.
maybe I don't know. Let's go through
Well,
all these.
Let's go through Acts first, because Acts is going to be the easiest. And the portion that he brings up here is Acts 11:9.
Can I run with this one?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to read Acts. Well, the whole book of Acts, and actually, Acts is volume 2, right? Luke 1 and 2, right? And so, but Acts 10, we hear about this Gentile named Cornelius who lives in the land of Israel because presumably he's been stationed there by the Roman government.
Right.
And so he kind of represents the occupying empire, right?
Right.
But he loves the God of Israel. So we're not told how he came to desire to worship and shape his life according to the worship of the God of Israel, and to support the local Jewish communities in this area that we learn about. But we know one thing is that his heart, that the Lord was calling him. Why? Because his prayers are answered, and we're told that. And the same time in Acts 10, Peter is given a vision. When Peter's hungry, he goes up on the roof, and he has this vision about food. Who doesn't dream about food when they're hungry? But anyway, so Acts 11 is kind of where, because Peter this whole thing happens. Peter goes to Cornelius's house. They all believe, they're all saved, etc. They're baptized. And then later, it says some of the circumcision here that Peter went and ate with this Gentile.
Right.
And they flip him some, what about it? Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing there? And so Peter's like, well, I got to tell you what happened. So what we're reading here in Acts 11 is where Peter is retelling the story again, even though we've just read the whole story in chapter 10. What we're reading here is Peter explaining the vision to brothers that are suspicious of Peter's behavior. So he's kind of under pressure, but then he's responding. He says, this is what I had a vision. And in verse 8, he says...